Start your day with It's the Business. Here's Phil Dobbie.
Bond yields, do you really understand what they are and how they work? Why have concerns about rising inflation seen bond yields rising? And what does this mean for the likelihood of interest rates rising? And what's the role of central banks in all of this?
It was pointed out that during 2020, around £180 billion of surplus savings were accumulated.
So will we spend all that, and will that demand push prices up, causing the central banks to push up interest rates? Well, probably not, but that might not stop bond yields rising anyway unless the Bank of England steps in, which it has been doing repeatedly. But have they been doing enough?
And so the change that will come is that the central banks, if they don't want this to get out of hand, are going to have to become even more prominent, and they're going to have to crowd out.
The government crowding out the private sector, and you thought we lived in a free market. Paul Kavangh from Patronus Partners joins me today to discuss what bond yields are, how they work, and why they matter. Well, we'll do our best to explain that anyway. And the OECD ups its forecast for growth this year. We are well on our way out of it, hopefully, but we're not there yet, which is why it's surely a concern that kids are back at school this week. Parents meeting at the school gate. Couldn't it all go pear-shaped?
Therefore, vaccination will have almost no role to play in reducing transmission in that group for some time, because we haven't yet got to the point those are vaccinated.
So just how prepared are we for another surge in infections? And that Piers Morgan walkout yesterday. Is it a staged drama? Has he readied himself for his next job?
I'm done with this. No. Sorry.
Yep, he's off. It's Wednesday, the 10th of March, 2021. Good morning.
And now, it's the business. Making sense of it all with Phil Dobbie.
Yeah, it's a funny old world, isn't it? Here we are in the midst of a global pandemic, a once-in-a-lifetime event, we hope, and it's already killed 2.6 million people. It will almost certainly kill at least 150,000 people here in the UK. And what are we talking about? We're talking the news dominated about how a Hollywood actress doesn't like the in-laws very much, and how a TV presenter is having a hissy fit because she doesn't return his phone calls.
And I understand that you don't like Meghan Markle. You've made it so clear a number of times on this programme, a number of times. And I understand that you've got a personal relationship with Meghan Markle, or had one, and she cut you off. She's entitled to cut you off if she wants to. Has she said anything about you since she cut you off? I don't think she has, but yet you continue to trash her.
OK, I'm done with this.
No.
Sorry, no. Sorry.
So, do you know what? That's pathetic.
You can trash me, maybe, not mine.
No.
See you later.
I'm being...
Sorry, can't do this.
This is absolutely diabolical behaviour.
Piers Morgan walking off the set. He does like to leave a mark, doesn't he? And he's not going to come back to ITV. He doesn't want to take the flack from his weather presenter. When did weather presenters get so mouthy? Do you remember Ian McGaskill? You'd never have him mouthing off like that. Hello, I'm Ian McGaskill. But I wonder whether it is an impression wasted on 99% of the population listening to this podcast. But I just wonder whether this is all faux outrage on the part of Piers Morgan. He's just acting on TV because very soon there's a new right-wing news channel. Andrew Neil is starting it up. Piers Morgan would be a natural fit for that. So I wonder whether this is just an extension of this big soap opera that we're seeing with the royal family, an actress, and now a TV presenter. I mean, we are living a soap opera. We'll see, how right this right-wing news network is going to be, because it seems, if you think the media, including the social media, is too left for you. And let's remember, social media is actually made up of people. How can it be too left for you? Because it's made up of people on the planet, left and right. But if they are too left for you, then create your own social network. That's what Mike Lindell has done. Mike Lindell is Mr. My Pillow, which you can get here. I wouldn't buy one because I don't agree with his politics. That's the thing, isn't it? So long as if you have a high profile and you make your politics known, then you're going to impact your sales. But he is a big Trump supporter. And he's been banned by Twitter because he was following the line on Trump's election fraud conspiracy theories. So he has announced he's starting a new social media platform that's going to launch in a couple of weeks, and says it's going to be bigger than Twitter. So just another 330 million active users for him to go. Here he is. Look, and if Twitter is for twits, his network, well, you only need to change one letter. Anyway, here he is.
It's, it was easy to step into that role because I do have a platform, at least, even though they're trying to suppress my voice, I'm getting it out there. People,
absolutely
getting it out there. And, God put me here for such a time as this. We all have a calling, and every one of us needs to get involved. I'm just doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
And you were so passionate about just getting here today.
Yeah, I had to get here. I've had so much going on, and I wanted to get here to go down Media Road, to get the voice out, to get out a word of hope.
My hope is, God put him on this world, by the way, to do this. So it's all God's fault. My hope is that this is not an echo chamber that does more harm than good. I mean, almost certainly Donald Trump will be doing whatever the equivalent of tweeting is on this new platform, should it take off. But it could become a breeding ground for fantasists, couldn't it? Anyway, watch that one with interest. By the way, yesterday we had Sir Michael Holden on the podcast talking about getting a strategic plan for transport and how nice that would be. Because then we would know how much we should invest in rail, and we'd have some objectives as well. The reason why we'd be investing public money in a rail network. Well, we are still waiting for the white paper to come out of a government review into the rail network. Been waiting a couple of years for that. Meanwhile, simultaneously, Sir Peter Hendy has been conducting a union connectivity review to look at transport links between the four nations of the UK, and that is being published. The interim report is going to be out today. It will apparently call for significantly faster rail links between England and Scotland, better rail between the north coast of Wales and England. It doesn't mention Boris's idea of a tunnel from Scotland to Northern Ireland. Strange that, isn't it? And it almost certainly won't mention the impact of customs checks into Northern Ireland either. But it does suggest halving the £13 levy on flights within the UK. Which, is that a good idea? So this is a levy that's charged just because, well, first of all, I mean, when you get on a plane rather than a train, then you are having a big impact on the environment. So that's fair enough, isn't it? It's almost like a carbon fee. But that doesn't matter now. We're going to halve that because that's what's holding us back. I would go to Scotland if it was £6 or £7 cheaper, wouldn't you? Who are these people coming up with these ideas? Well, I tell you who it is. Sir Peter Hendy is the guy who's running the review. He's the current chairman of Network Rail. So perhaps he feels like he's got to provide lip service to the airlines, perhaps. But surely we need to charge for flights, and nobody is going to travel to Scotland more if they have to pay £6 or £7 less in a government levy. And talking of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon has spoken by decree, and she has used her power for good rather than evil. Now, you people of Scotland, you can meet, provided...
Meeting will be possible in any outdoor space, including private gardens. But please do stick to the new rules. Gatherings must be a maximum of 4 people from 2 households, and you should only go indoors if that is essential in order to reach a back garden or to use a toilet. Which is very good news, isn't it? So if you're around at a friend's house, you can use their toilet. You don't have to take the colostomy bag with you. Which can ruin all social settings, can't it, really? Apologies to those people who are. It's inflicted with a colostomy bag. I do feel for you. So the easing of lockdowns has started, and of course, the kids are back at school, which Chris Whitty has said, and this is just common sense, isn't it? It is going to cause an increase in cases. I mean, there are predictions of perhaps 30,000 more deaths still to come, and the logic behind why we're going to see more cases is pretty straightforward. Here he is at a government hearing yesterday.
And remember that the people who drive the wave of infection are not generally older citizens. It's generally younger ones. So the vaccination policy that we've taken at the moment in the UK, which is absolutely to go through the highest risk people first, will really seriously reduce the ratio between numbers of infections and deaths, and that's a fantastic achievement. But it will have a much smaller effect on the actual drive of the wave of transmission, which tends to be in younger adults.
So just think about all those mums and dads dropping the kids off, having a chat with the other mums and dads at the school gate, and then the kids coming home, and what are they bringing back home? Which raises the question, why did we reopen the schools for everyone this week? Why didn't we wait? Chris Whitty made the point yesterday that the ratio of cases will go right down as the vaccine kicks in. So why not wait until a few weeks, till the Easter holidays, and then the kids can go back after, when more of us will have had had the vaccine. I'm booked in for a week on Saturday. So give it a few weeks, and then you've got the over 50s all done. Give it a few more weeks, then you've got the over 40s. Problem is solved. But no, this impetus to get the kids back so quickly. I understand that, that we're concerned about the kids' education and mental health, but we've been through so much. We've got to get this right now, haven't we? 40% of the adult population in Scotland has already been vaccinated, by the way. So they are actually ahead of us in England. Maybe we need to speed up the process. Maybe we could do that, when you meet outside with other people, you could start vaccinating each other while you're having a natter over a cup of tea, which you'll be able to do soon. Also have the jab at the same time. Look, the good news, the OECD has just published their revised forecasts for GDP growth. Now, just back in December, they were forecasting 4.2% growth this year. Now they've upped the forecast to 5.6% for global growth. Just a bit less than that for the UK, 5.1% growth. But the United States, they have doubled the prediction from 3.2% growth, which is what they were saying in December, to 6.5% now. Both of them predictions for what the GDP growth is going to be this year. So from 3.2 to 6.5%. That is quite a leap, thanks to a change in president with a bit more of a commitment to the vaccine rollout and a $1.9 trillion stimulus package or recovery package. It's really a recovery package. So they are pushing ahead with that in the United States. The other thing, by the way, that the OECD said in their forecast, nearly 10 million people are out of work now, 10 million more people out of work around the world as a result of this pandemic. I'm sure it's actually more than that. And in poorer countries, substantial job losses have increased poverty and deprivation for millions of workers. I think we know that too. And the UK's response to that is, well, we're going to halve foreign aid. Just saying. But think about the cost of COVID in the West, how much money is being pumped into economies. Over the next day or so, that stimulus package will be finalised. $1,400 is going to be paid to most adults. And they do actually physically send out checks. I didn't realise that. I thought it would just be a bank transfer. But no, they send out the checks because the last one had Donald Trump's signature on it. Whereas Joe Biden is not going to use this as a personal branding opportunity, so he's not going to sign them. So I don't know whether that means they won't work. You take them to the bank and they go, no, this is no good. It hasn't got a signature on it. I presume someone else's signature is going to go on it. But there is a connection between this stimulus package and what's been happening in the bond markets. Bonds are falling down a little today in terms of the yields, but we've seen US Treasury yields rising sharply over the last month. In fact, yields around the world. So for those who need to get up to speed, which will be most of us, I'm sure, who need to get up to speed on what bond yields are, well, every time the government issues debt, they issue that into the markets in the form of bonds, which are bought usually by banks and other financial institutions, and they agree to pay an interest rate each year for the duration of those bonds, which could be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, whatever the duration is, they're going to pay interest each year, and then at the end of it, you get your money back. And lately, that interest rate, of course, has been very low, so the amount that is paid out is very low when the government issues those bonds in the first place. But in their lifetime, these bonds are bought and sold, and so they change their value. When demand is high, the price rises, of course. When fewer people want to invest in government bonds, the price falls. Simple supply and demand argument. But the amount the government pays in interest is the same. So if you were paying 1% for $1,000 worth of bonds, that's $100 per year they'd pay out. But if the price of bonds dropped by half, well, they're still paying out £100 because that's how much they said they were going to pay out when the bonds were issued, even though the bonds might now have halved in value. They might only be worth £500. So the yield is no longer £100 out of £1,000. That's 1%. It's actually £100 out of £500. So that's 2%. Now, the differences are really that extreme, of course, but we have seen yields on 10-year US Treasuries. In October last year, they were around 0.6 or 0.7%. Now they are wavering around 1.6%. There doesn't seem to be much appetite to go beyond that. As I said, they're actually falling back a little bit today, but there is still quite a rise. And in the UK, the difference is even more pronounced. 10-year gilt yields, that's what we call government bonds in this country, gilts. The yields for those started the year around 0.2%. And the yield late last month got as high as 0.83%. Now, some say this is because of inflation fears. You don't want to hang on to government bonds if you're going to see their monetary value decrease as general prices rise. Because when you get to the end of the whatever the period is for those bonds, then you want to see how much money you're going to get back. And if you've got high inflation, then it will have lost a lot of value. Hopefully that makes sense. Paul Kavangh joins me, CEO of investment management firm Patronus Partners. So how's that for an idiot's guide to what's concerning the markets right now and how bond yields work?
That's pretty good, actually. That's a very good summary of the way that these instruments operate. And but what we have to do is obviously take that knowledge of the basics and ask, what factors does a bond fund manager take into account when assessing when they wish to purchase bonds?
Yeah, and that's what makes it more difficult, isn't it? Because you've got bonds of different durations and they've all got their own risk involved, and you've got to gauge which is going to be the best one to buy at any particular point in time.
Absolutely. And the further you go out in time, it doesn't matter if you're a weather person or you're a bond fund manager, you're dealing less in science and more in art, going out further in time, because you just don't know what the situation is. If you asked a bond fund manager 3 years ago, was a pandemic a risk into their factor? No, of course it wasn't. I mean, it just wasn't part of it. But going forward, it is a big factor. It's a big factor because it weighs on the economy. We have so much more knowledge now of what a pandemic can do to an economy. But we also have knowledge about what response comes out of government and central banks to an economy. And therefore, there's a balancing act there. But but when we're not dealing with exceptional items like pandemics, but we're dealing with just ordinary things that take place every day, like rain and sunshine, inflation is the other material factor in terms of a study of bonds, because it's inflation which is the damaging component to anybody who's lending money for longer than, say, 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, because it's got a set value, and that value will decrease as the value of money decreases over time. And that is the concern now, isn't it? So what has driven that? I mean, it seems that this has been driven by the belief that the government is issuing so much money, particularly in the United States, another 1.9 trillion, which is going to have to be raised in the form of more bonds, that if you've got so much extra money going into the money supply, you've got so many more bonds, then they're going to be worth less. And that's basically inflation is going to be caused because we've got such an increase in the money supply, which hasn't, a theory that's not really been proven, really, has it?
Absolutely. So there's quite a lot of pent-up demand, particularly if you think to the United Kingdom. It was pointed out that during 2020, around £180 billion of surplus savings were accumulated by individuals who just were not travelling. They weren't spending in restaurants and hospitality and travelling to and from work. And this accumulated savings, the feeling is that certainly there's going to be a rush of spending as the economy begins to open up, and that effect will be over the course of 2, 3, 4, 5 years of spending. So whereas the government has moved in significantly and spent, to their own estimate, £407 billion of exceptional cost around the pandemic, to try and make things as comfortable as possible for everybody. The furlough, for example, putting important income into those that cannot work and allow them to at least operate a sensible lifestyle whilst they can't earn. But the savings on top of that coming through does give hope that when we do rebound, we're going to rebound quite sharply.
Well, I'm glad you used the word hope there, because there's no guarantee on that, is there? I mean, it could be savings, or it could be people who've just paid off more of their debt and feel quite happy about that, but they're not going to change. You know, we could actually find behaviour is still subdued, because we actually go, well, okay, I was living a more frugal life and I quite like it. And I don't need to go into London quite as much for work, so I'm not going to be spending as much on sandwiches, and I don't need to have such an expensive wardrobe. We might find that actually doesn't happen.
Well, that's correct. And the Bank of England obviously they have so much data around them to try and assess these judgments. But even they are unsure about what sort of life we are going to look for going forward. And on the one hand, there is going to be a demand to try and get people back into the city centres, go back to the offices, let's have a normalised life. And on the one hand, you have Goldman Sachs saying that this is what we're going to do. But on the other hand, we have BP saying, no, we're thinking of home working going forward. And I think the Bank of England have tried to bring all of this together to give a sort of best guess and believe the economy may be scarred by 1 to 2% in the long haul by changes to practice and changes to the way. But that's looking forward. But there are things in the here and now that we know are happening. And that broadly relates to the global impact of this stimulus that's taking place around the world, now hitting the commodity sector. Commodities, there's a huge conversion of pandemic spending and stimulus. But at the same time, the environment and the climate changes that we mustn't lose sight of. There's great work underway in terms of building business for this climate change over the course of the next 20 or 30 years, which is going to require incredible investment.
So are people getting into commodities and pushing the price up in commodities because they're worried about inflation? So you don't want to have anything that's got a cash, you don't want to hold bonds or cash because they're going to devalue over time. So you get into commodities because they're going to, is it a bit of an inflation hedge?
Yes, there's an element of this. There's both financial and also if we are going into a climate situation that's concerned, particularly as America under Biden now has a clear roadmap for investment into green initiatives, and also really picking on China in a sense, and saying, well, okay, we've all got to move in this way, and there is talk about potentially carbon taxes, international carbon border taxes that are coming down the tracks, that is going to compel the world more to investment in this area. And so we are seeing elements of stockpiling. Just remember that if we take hard metals, things like copper, these are not things to easily switch on supply. The time taken for the identification, exploration, and build out of a mine in copper is measured in decades, not in months.
Right. So you think people are doing it now because while the going's good, and so people are putting money behind that. But I mean that wouldn't apply to oil. I mean, we know from the experience from last year, we can only store so much oil, and it's got to be consumed. We hit the problem last year that we had more oil than not only did we not know what to do with, but also that we could actually adequately store, which is why we had that big crash and oil turn into negative rates. And yet, oil prices are shooting up. So obviously that is just because there's this expectation there's going to be greater demand as we come out of lockdowns.
There's been some very, very significant cuts to production and supply in the oil market, which are not being corrected at the moment. We're going through OPEC meetings and realising that there's a hard stance being taken on the supply side. Whereas on the demand side, we're definitely seeing this movement is picking up as measured by movement of travel is beginning to pick up. And I look forward to not too far in the future, the pent-up demand for people to want to get into cars again and onto planes is coming down the tracks, and that is what's definitely driving the oil price.
Which
at this stage.
gets us back to inflation, of course, doesn't it? Because it's a big contributor to inflation. Getting back to, these concerns about rising bond yields, what is the connection between the yields that that are paid on government bonds and the interest rates set by the central bank? Do they have to be roughly the same? Can bond yields rise without the central bank saying, well, we're going to have to lift interest rates so that they are aligned?
In conventional markets where the private sector is buying the bonds, it's the private sector that is setting what is the right rate for the risk. And particularly when you're faced in an environment which we do at the moment, where you can paint a view of inflation creeping up, and that the risk that you would wish to apply to your pricing of the bond will be pushing yields higher. Now, we're not in conventional times, because we know the central banks have been buying the bonds. They haven't been buying them at the rate that is equivalent to the issuance of bonds. So you're still leaning on the private sector to buy these bonds. But if the private sector said, no, the pricing's all wrong, I don't like the risk at this level, and indeed we saw this quite recently on an auction in the US, which was apparently one of the worst auctions ever. This took place just 2 or 3 weeks ago. Is indicative that the private sector is not paying these prices. It demands higher yields for the risk it expects to take over the next few years. And so the change that will come is that the central banks, if they don't want this to get out of hand, are going to have to become even more prominent in
buy more bonds.
Market, and they're going to have to crowd out the private sector further up the curve, because they are going to be in this process of trying to keep bond yields down. If these bond yields become out of control, ramifications across a wide range of sectors is huge.
But how far can they go? Because they're, in some places they're earning 70% of the bonds. I mean, if they, I guess we know there's going to be a lot more issued as well. So, it is the expectation. The reason why we're seeing these yields is part of that. The yields rising is because they're thinking, well, there's going to be so many more, and central banks aren't going to hold the same ratio. And so if they pick up that ratio, then maybe those bond yields will start falling again. Is that the expectation, do you think?
Yes. Well, I mean, I suppose to remember that, central banks ultimately can do what they want. I mean, they can own 100% of this, and they can just say, we are bid at this level for as many as you, and that at the end of the day, it deals with the yield curve. They obviously have other issues that they have to contemplate before going quite as far as that, and the steadier she goes, doing enough and allowing the markets to feel that the markets have got independence is something that is to be held on to at the moment. But you only have to fast forward the tape a little bit to think about where this could go if yields were to add another 100 basis points.
But if the yields are going up because people are bailing out, and they're getting into, they're inflating other asset classes, they're inflating commodities, they're inflating the share market, they are inflating house prices, all that sort of stuff, none of which is good, then the way around it is perhaps to, and the reason people are bailing out also is because of inflation. Inflation concerns the worry about losing the value of the bonds. Then what about index-linked bonds? If you issue index-linked bonds and make them green bonds, which is something Rishi Sunak's been talking about, then people will move away from non-index-linked bonds. The central government have to buy less of them, and they wouldn't be going into those other asset classes, and it would help the economy, green the economy.
Yes, I think government policy in terms of encouraging and diverting assets into areas that they, to meet their needs, is highly desirable. It has to be the route forward. And given the lack of choice and lack of selection for investors, they could make that an attractive offering at the moment, whilst at the same time meeting many of the needs. The government's biggest challenge over the course of the next 10 or 20 years, alongside climate change, is really to try and narrow the gap between the rich and the poor. It was a problem that was there pre the pandemic. I believe the pandemic has just opened that wound even further. And really the rebalancing that has to take place over the next 10 or 20 years. And Boris Johnson referred to this in a speech he recently made around the green initiatives, was that money going into this area can start to rebalance that up. It can create jobs, it can create valuable jobs with that level of investment behind it.
Well, it could work, couldn't it? But I mean, who knows right now? Because it is such a confusing world. I mean, you must find it quite fascinating in your line of work right now, because nobody is absolutely certain what happens next, are they?
Well, yes and no. I think there's there is.
You're not allowed to say yes because you've got clients. They might be listening. No, you're on top of it all.
No, but I do think that there's that there are some big factors at play at the moment. I mean, ultimately, what I enjoy doing is seeing businesses grow and equity is growing, and to find good businesses that need growth capital is what I like to be involved with day to day.
And I'm sure there are plenty of opportunities because the world is going to be very different, isn't it? So as one door closes, another one opens, as they say. So massive opportunities for investment, I would have thought, down the track. Good to talk anyway, Paul. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Phil.
Apologies for the shocking line there, but we could just about make out what we were saying, couldn't we? That's all that counts. Now, look, tomorrow, well, this is an interesting story. Liberty Steel, right on death's door, not helped by the collapse of Greensill Capital. And we'll look at Greensill Capital had an interesting way where they actually bring forward payments for you for your invoices. So you'd invoice somebody, you get paid straight away by Greensill Capital. They would carry the can until the other party paid you. A bit of a risky model, so no surprise really that Greensill Capital has collapsed. We'll look at what that means for Liberty Steel and also what it means for the steel industry generally. Are we going to be reliant on steel from China? Should we just close up shop and buy from China, or is that a risk? Steve Keane will be answering all of those questions tomorrow morning on It's the Business. That's it for today, though. I'm Phil Dobbie. Don't forget to tell your friends to join us. itsthebusiness.co.uk, and you can email me as well. phil@itsthe.business is my email address. See you tomorrow morning. Have a great day.
It's the Business with Phil Dobbie. Listen online at itsthe.business or wherever good podcasts